Okay, good afternoon again. Let's get started with our electric vehicle infrastructure and interconnection working group. If we can go to the next slide. So today's agenda, we will have, we'll discuss the scope of the EVIIWG again, and then we'll have a live review of the document, making edits as we go along and seeing, you know, if we need to add or take away things. And then we'll discuss the next steps in the SAPA filing. Just the regular housekeeping things. Can you go back?
Oh, yes.
Because I always forget. We can use the chat or raise hands functions. I'm sure everybody's used to that by now. And then we will be, this meeting is being recorded, and the presentation materials will be posted on DMM as well as the EVIIWG webpage. And we can go to the next slide. So again, the scope of the EVIIWG, at the midpoint order, the stakeholder process shall address and advance, among other issues, transparency and the queue backlog, wait times of the application and the application development. We're also establishing a standard process for the interconnection applications, which may shorten and ideally streamline the intake of applications that are driven by electrification and the CLCPA. And on page 29 of the order, the Commission directs Con Edison to submit a straw proposal describing the efforts put forth in their streamlining their queue management system for consideration further development by the EVIIWG. Next slide, please. We have two categories of changes that were identified in this document. We have the documents with the edits and the red lines, and we have important items and issues that are beyond the current scope of the EVIIWG. So some of the things for commission determination, some of the bigger issues that have been identified that are beyond the scope of this current EVIIWG, but are still important topics, and we hear you when you talk about them, and they'll definitely be brought up to the commission to make decisions on where they should be addressed. But some of these examples include, and if we feel that we need to add to this list, we can, but these are the ones that I just put together. Flexible interconnection, energization tracking tool, the V2G phase interconnection process. I know, Mari, you had a question. Oh, is she on? She might not even be on. You know, why I put the phase interconnection project. I kind of think it was a mistake at the last meeting, but I think it was relating to the V2G. So I just put V2G. So if there's a phase interconnection project that includes the V2G, it's beyond the scope of this. This group right now. The EAM and dynamic import. The document will be SAPA'd for further comments and commission direction. And everything that is done within these working groups will be reviewed by the commission, and during the SAPA process, if additional comments need to be made, those would be reviewed as well. Oh.
See, Mari, I see your hand raised. You can come off mute.
Great, thank you. I just had a quick question on the slide. When I was looking through this again before this meeting, I forgot to ask about the energization tracking tool. Can you clarify what that is?
Yeah, I have to double check which comment is it. It was in one of the comments suggested working with NYSERDA to develop an energization tracking tool to review the timelines of energization. That's just not something that's within the scope of what EVIIWG has the authority to determine based on the commission determination, or the midpoint review order slides we just looked at. I can get you that language from the comment following the meeting if we need to find that.
No, that's great. Actually, that clarifies it, because that was in our comments on the pace of energization tracking. I just wanted to make sure that that was what that was referring to. So that's helpful. Thank you. Yeah,
no problem. And Richard, I see your hands up as well.
Yeah, hi, Richard, New York Best. I was just wondering, is there a plan for these topics that are out of scope? What the next steps will be with the commission? I'm just wondering if there's anything written somewhere, what the next steps will be.
Hi, Richard. This is Stephanie McDermott. Thank you so much for the question. So all of these comments will be included in the review of the commission, and when we SAPA the EVIIWG, we can include, you know, questions of what the group thinks that the commission should direct it to do in the future. So in the order that results from this, the commission could direct the EVIIWG to take on those additional subjects. Or the commission could, you know, start a different group or direct a different group to take them on.
Or a different proceeding.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think my main point is like we have some members obviously with vehicle to grid interconnection issues. And it's been bounced around a little bit between the ITWG here and Grid of the Future, and it hasn't really found a home. So I just wanted to identify that in the meeting, specifically vehicle to grid interconnection. And there's also one other issue I brought up in the past meeting, publicly accessible interconnection queue for these projects has been a issue because some sites have taken up capacity while SRR process is undergoing. So it'd just be great to, if there's somewhere I can submit those comments. I mean, we submitted some originally, probably 5 months ago, but just wanted to make sure there's next steps for this.
Thanks. Yeah, we agree that those are really important topics. You're welcome to include them in your comments on the straw proposal when that goes through the SAPA process. And we anticipate that there will be further opportunities for comment in the Grid of the Future proceeding within the next couple months. So keep an eye out for that too.
And to add to that real quick as well, all the comments received for EVIIWG are being summarized in Appendix C of the straw proposal, so you can anticipate seeing those comment summaries included in the document in that way as well, and that'll go towards or before the commission.
Okay, great. That's very helpful. Okay, thank you.
Does anybody else have any comments, questions before we move on? Seeing and hearing nothing.
Okay, next slide.
So yeah, today we're going to go through all the red lines that have been made to the document since the previous meeting, taking into account some of the comments and providing possible ways to address these. As we go through each section, we're going to use the polling feature to determine the satisfaction of EVIIWG stakeholders with the changes. And we're looking for this to be a collaborative process. So to the extent you have a comment to the changes we're discussing, or if you've made the comment and would like to provide further context, make sure it's sufficiently explained, please feel free to raise your hand and jump in as we go along. So just real quick on...
Cole, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Just a question on procedure here. If there are things kind of like in between the portions that come up in your review right now that we had questions about, should we raise them at that time or separately at the end if we have things that don't come up?
Yeah, I think I envision it. We'll go through section by section. So if you have anything in that section, even if there's no current red lines right now, you can raise your hand and we can walk through that section as time allows. So.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
Yep, no problem. So yeah, real quick. So with the polling feature, just to make sure everybody, just quick level setting on this. If it does not automatically appear when we submit a poll, you can access it by selecting the three dots in the bottom right corner of your screen where the red arrow is pointing. And then there will be an option there that says polling to access it in case it accidentally closes or you need to find it later. So if there's any questions, please feel free to message one of the staff on the call in the chat function, and we'll try to help you as we can. But generally, we've seen that it should automatically appear as we release them. So with that said, I'm going to hurry and stop sharing the slide deck and move to a Microsoft Word document. Give me just a moment. Okay. So, jumping into this document, currently we'll be updating the table of contents and The dates, our title slides here once we finalize changes to correct any formatting that's missing there right now. We didn't see any comments or suggestions to these introductory sections related to definitions and abbreviations. So I'll be starting with the introduction. So beginning with the changes that have been made so far, staff has gone through and just added a new paragraph to introduce the document discussing the midpoint review order, the midpoint review orders. Yeah, sorry, let me make it a little larger for everyone. So our first change reviews what the midpoint review order directed EVIIWG to consider. So it now reads, in the order approving midpoint review white paper's recommendations with modifications, the midpoint review order, the commission recommended establishing a stakeholder group whose goal is to develop an EV interconnection framework that addresses any application backlog issues effectively and sufficiently. Further, the midpoint review order states the stakeholder process shall address and advance, among other issues, transparency, the queue backlog, wait times, and application development. Establishing a standard process for the interconnection applications may shorten and ideally streamline the intake of applications that are driven by electrification and the CLCPA. Furthermore, the midpoint review order directed staff to initiate an electric vehicle infrastructure interconnection working group and for Con Edison to, quote, submit a straw proposal describing the efforts put forth in streamlining their queue management system for consideration and further development. So this excerpt is now replacing what was previously the second sentence, just really clarifying what the scope of the EVIIWG currently is and establishing essentially that level setting slide that we started off the meeting with.
Does anybody have any comments, questions, suggestions on that? If not, we'll move on to the next section.
Okay, so then the remaining part that's been modified so far in the introduction is as follows. So following the table describing the methods for streamlining queue management, table 1 in the document, the following sentences have been modified to read, the methods and guiding principles in table 1 is a framework for make-ready program application queue management of V1G EV charging stations described in accordance with the volume of applications that are received. Currently, the upstate utilities have not received a high influx of applications leading to such a high backlog as Con Edison. Therefore, the application queue management framework has not needed to be fully implemented. Other variations occurring between companies may be caused by differences in staffing resources, V1G make-ready program application volume, service territory demographics, or utility-specific engineering standards, among other reasons. Therefore, examples cited in this modified proposal illustrate how one utility has implemented a particular practice, and other utilities should begin to implement the same practices within their specific parameters and when applicable triggers are met to avoid any application backlog. Examples of differences occurring between utilities' queue management practices can include, but may not be limited to, an on-hold policy and the medium for communicating on-hold status to customers.
Cole, I see your hand.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess a question on this to start. If you could scroll up a little bit to the previous, the line, therefore the application queue management framework has not been fully implemented. Is it correct to say that all of the utilities have implemented at least some of the things that are in this proposal, and there may be specific things about like high application periods that they haven't all implemented because they haven't seen that? Or is this saying that like all of the things in this proposal have not been implemented and the utilities don't expect to do so unless there are high application periods?
That's a great question. Katie, I don't know if you can weigh in on that. Cole, that's something, I don't see Katie, you know, coming off mute, so.
Sorry, I'm here. I'm having.
You have to unmute both.
Can you hear me okay now?
We can, yep.
Okay, sorry about that. So the answer is that for the high application volume practices, yes, Cole, your characterization is correct. The only other place that I would call out, and the reason we asked this, or we made that change that you see there in purple, and the reason that kind of fully implemented applies is that there are a couple of practices in the section about pre-engagement, where because each of the joint utilities has different administration budgets, for example, we've been able to implement something like site assessments, for example, to different extents. So Con Edison has the biggest incentive budget and therefore the biggest administration budget. So we're basically able to offer a site assessment for any customer that comes to us. That's not necessarily the case across all of the utilities. So I think that's another area where it can help. It's this kind of general language is helpful.
Got it. That makes sense, Katie. So is it? I'm getting a lot of feedback. Ooh, there we go. Sorry about that. Is it fair to say then that this language about the application queue management framework has not been fully implemented by all the utilities? That applies mainly to the language that is further below in the document in, I think, what is section 1.2 for the high volume application periods. But the things, for example, in 1.1 general MRP application management, like cancellation policy, temporary pauses, transparent records, that sort of things, are either today fully implemented by the JU, or the expectation it would be fully implemented by the JU under this modified proposal.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, got it. Okay. So,
For section 1. Yep.
I think an edit that I may have then on 4, if we could scroll back down a little bit, and this is maybe just a question for staff, whereas that language in the middle of the fourth line down, other utilities, I think it read should before, and now it's utilities would begin to implement the same practices. One recommendation that I was going to have kind of throughout the document is strengthening this language to make it clear that the utilities shall do these things, recognizing that there are some things like that only apply to the high volume application periods, but the operational things, for example, in 1.1, all the utilities either are already doing them or would be expected to do them. So I guess the question for staff is the idea that this document would basically be copied over directly into a commission order, in which case it would be appropriate to make language like that. The utility shall do this because it's a commission directive, or is this document recommendations to the commission that the commission would then modify into specific directives, in which case I would say the language should at least say should instead of more conditional would.
That's a great question, Cole. Because this is not a commission issued document as of right now, we can't use shall or must. We can absolutely change it back to should rather than would. And then in the event that the commission directs the utilities to implement this, then that language would be changed to shall or must.
Got it. Thank you. Yes, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I would certainly support that change.
Mari, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was actually going to say something along the same lines, that I think it would be helpful to see this as a little bit more standardizing. I think that was the one thing that was missing in the intro paragraph, is that there is language in the commission order and in the quotes that you all provided in the level setting slide about standardizing the process. And I think any changes that we can make to help to standardize or allow customers to see and have some clarity about what the processes are going to be on the utility side would be really helpful. So I think this is, it's a good start in thinking about that throughout.
Is there anything specific, Mari, that you would add or change, or just, changes throughout that make it clear that this is supposed to be standardized throughout the state?
Yeah, I'd probably, like I said, state in the intro, the part about it being more of a, trying to standardize this process. And then as we go through, if I see other opportunities like that, I'll definitely point them out. But I think starting with this paragraph that you're on is good. So I'll keep that in mind as we move forward.
Okay, and I am taking notes for all of these suggestions. So, and this is being recorded, so we can go back. Katie, I see your hand up.
Okay, yes. I think in that same vein, it might also be helpful to set up front or kind of reset, because when I was reading through, I think there might be some misunderstanding about if this document is meant to be a set of guidelines and recommendations for the utility, or if it's meant to be a customer-facing document. I did just want to say at the beginning that the way it was written, and I think the way we kind of responded and viewed the comments that stakeholders have made, maybe a little bit kind of where we're talking past each other at times, because we and the joint utilities viewed this as guidelines for utilities to follow. And I think some of the stakeholders viewed it as like a customer-facing document. And that speaks to the idea of like standardization. So I thought it might be useful to discuss that now.
I think that's a really good point. And Katie, do you think it would be helpful to have specific directives or sections that are geared more towards the utilities, and then different sections that are geared more towards customers?
I think where we as the utilities have invested a lot in our websites and our program manuals and implementation plans, which are published and available for our customers. And I think, if there needs to be something that is originated here and hammered out here that we then transfer to something that's customer facing, that would be the kind of path of least resistance, and get that information to the places where customers already know to go for information. So I would view this as sort of like the document where we are establishing the practices and identifying where there is uniformity, and then we're translating those practices into something that already exists that's customer facing, versus, this document of course will be public, but its purpose really isn't to be customer facing. So I would advocate for keeping this kind of utility and stakeholder facing.
Does anybody else have any reactions to that? Mari?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Katie. I think we were one of the ones that were one of the groups that were thinking of this more in the customer facing way. And I think there was a little bit in the commission order that wasn't super clear on that. And I think we are interpreting the direction on that. And I think it definitely went to a very utility guidelines document focus versus the customer facing. But I think we kind of limited the scope to that and not the commission. So, and then in one of the ways that we actually, made this scope actually into something that could be customer facing is in the documentation on EVIIWG on the website, it said something about, standardized interconnection procedures similar to the New York SIR. So I think that's part of the reason we were thinking of it in that way. And so I think, we have been limiting it to that, but that's not necessarily what the commission limited us to. So I do think it's a good discussion to have, and probably one I should have brought up earlier, because we were moving definitely in that more of that direction, which is a lot of our comments have been about how can we standardize this? How can we make it more transparent? How can we make it, bring more clarity to the process for customers? And then how can we bring accountability to this? Because if customers have clarity, then they can point to there's an actual process that we're using to understand, what the process is on the utility side and what our responsibilities are and what their responsibilities are.
That's really helpful, Mari. Thank you. Josh Kaplan?
Yes, thank you. This is Josh Kaplan from National Grid, also within the joint utilities, and I guess just sort of to add on to this point, I don't think as the joint utilities we're really against creating some documentation that could help streamline, standardize, help customers understand. It's just sort of in our experience of running these type of programs, the documentation that generally ends up on DMM for the proceeding doesn't tend to get really dug through by a lot of the installers and end use customers that are participating in these programs. Or if it does, I'm not sure how much they're retaining. And so that's why we just find more success with our outreach and communication efforts to do things like website materials, brochures, webinars, or other presentations, even one-on-one chats with installers and customers. So we think that those venues are probably the long-term good home for anything that we want to share with customers out of the EVIIWG, as opposed to this document itself.
So ultimately, if the commission directed the utilities to create more of an implementation plan or some sort of specific outreach that's customer facing, and then also direct the utilities to implement this standardized plan, is that what we see as sort of crossing that divide between, whether this is for customers or for utilities?
Yeah, I think it's basically sort of the outcome of the EVIIWG. So if as a group we decide that something needs to be communicated out in a certain way, I don't think living it in this straw proposal document is going to really effectively communicate to the installers and customers and developers. Rather, if we choose that we need to do something as the EVIIWG group, the better directive would be that the utilities take that back, work with our marketing and outreach teams, and develop some very specific customer-facing materials to share that message. Wouldn't necessarily even be an implementation plan. It could just be, something we go do, and we could always post it to DMM as well. If we're also posting it, on our website or sharing it.
And I think there's some examples already in the document to this effect, like having the cancellation policy included in the program agreement. Like if we're directed to do that, we'll just do that. We'll modify the program agreement to make sure the cancellation policy is in there. And actually, I think for most utilities it already is. But if it needs to be revised, that's where the action happens, as opposed to it happening in a third document.
Bill, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Bill Ehrlich from Tesla. I've been sort of listening in, not saying much on a number of these calls, and we are supportive of the direction of having standardization and just wanting customers to be able to anticipate some sort of known timeline based on the type of project that they're bringing kind of across the JU. One thought on where some of this documentation could live, I'm hearing a number of different things from, Con Ed, National Grid, joint utilities, maybe not wanting to be overly prescriptive if they already have stuff on their website and now this is a different thing, that may cause some confusion. I know that there's a joint utility website, a JU website. I've been to it a couple times. I'm not sure if that would be the sort of location where sort of this high level standardization, here's what you can expect across joint utilities that gets linked to, from all of the JU websites. So, if you're on the National Grid website, you click on this link and you go to the same place as if you're on the Con Ed website. So just kind of as a customer with lots of accounts and lots of new services coming, definitely wanting, some amount of standardization and expectation, but not wanting to be too overly prescriptive if it's gonna cause administrative work rather than if it's going to unfocus the utilities from what they're already trying to do to meet our needs. So that's just a customer transportation, electrification, kind of charging thoughts going through my head. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. That's helpful. I think we have directed the JU to put things on their website before, so I think that's a great suggestion here. I think I had seen a couple hands go up and then come down, so I just want to give anybody else a moment to speak up now if they want to. Otherwise, we can keep moving on. Okay, we'll keep going.
All right, so starting forward with operational measures, we've made some updates to section 1.1. So it now reads, after a participant submits a make-ready program application, utility teams should first review the application for completeness. The participant will be given the opportunity to supplement or modify their application at this time. Once the make-ready program application is complete, the utility teams should utilize the following best practices to efficiently advance the application throughout the make-ready program incentive process. Appendices A and B describe the make-ready program application flow for the downstate and upstate utilities, respectively. Section 1.1.1 is a response to a comment that we received from EVIIWG. So I have this down. We've addressed it in a couple of different spots throughout the document, and I know Katie had left a comment in this document discussing the joint utilities perspective. So real quick, let me hurry and just read what EVIIWG was suggesting and what this possible edit was going to cover. And then I think we can let Katie and Mari, if you want to speak to this, the point that you've added, we can jump on that. So real quick, in EVIIWG's comments, EVIIWG had suggested requiring the utilities to provide detailed results following service determination and/or the engineering review process. So EVIIWG had said that similar requirements are in the New York SIR that can provide additional visibility into the process and help customers understand why certain upgrades are necessary. Currently, the proposal provides no detail on what must be communicated to the customer after review. The joint utilities, Katie, if you wanted to kind of go through your response here, or Mari, whoever feels like jumping in first, I think that would be a helpful discussion here.
Mari, do you want to start by saying what you were envisioning with the additional detail?
Sure, yeah, I think
I think
echo. I think that was a good summary of it, and I hadn't seen the actual language, so I might just read through. But so Katie, if you want to go, and then I can share anything.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I think, what we wanted to, I think I have an overarching question, which is this actually a bit more related to phased connection? Like, is kind of what the underlying ask is here? Is it really about getting customers information about capacity at a specific site such that they can make a decision as to whether they want to phase their project and phase construction?
Yeah,
Yeah.
good question. I've hearing myself multiple times. So I've still got an echo. There we go. So yeah, this is actually, it's not just for phased interconnection, actually. So this is providing enough information to the customer that they have what they need to change the scope of their project if necessary to avoid grid upgrades. So if the review process comes back and there's not enough capacity, they can say, okay, actually, I could do with fewer chargers at the site, or fewer, less load at the site, and they can modify the project. I think phased interconnection would definitely be a part of the conversation if they couldn't do with less, but that's not the only reason. This is just how much transparency can we give to the customer so that they can make informed decisions about their projects and how to move them forward.
Okay, I think that's a helpful distinction to know between kind of what this edit is about versus what the phased connection suggestion is about. For this one in particular, there are kind of two strains of thought here that the JU flagged. One is that anything that we do to change the way service determination is done or the information that we're providing to customers, it ultimately is going to affect more than just EV customers. So I do think it's important to make sure that we're taking into account more than just EV stakeholders if we're driving to something that could ultimately affect, building electrification customers or industrial customers, and how their projects would be studied and how they would receive information. So that was one consideration that the JU had and wanted to flag as something that may not be kind of an intended consequence of this edit, but is a consequence of the edit. And then the second is that I think, and I would love to hear from some customers here, but I think that our view is when customers do have questions, whether it's for additional information about why upgrades are needed or for more detailed analysis, or questions about what analysis was done, that can be discussed when the customer calls their point of contact or writes them an email. So I think our view is that for those two reasons, that this edit is not needed, or possibly, we'll hopefully hear from some customers now, but possibly not going to drive like a material change in customer behavior.
Elizabeth, we see your hand is up.
Great, thanks. It's Elizabeth Turnbull from Alliance for Transportation Electrification. I think on this one, I would be curious to know a little bit more, to what extent we think the bulk of customers sort of need that type of an approach. It's not clear to me that that's something that every customer would need. And I think, to Katie's point, this is sort of, it's very clear that this is all sort of through the Make Ready program track. And so I guess the question is, are we looking for an expanded service determination or engineering review within that track, or writ large for all service requests? And so, and it, I think at other utilities and other programs, that's a little bit easier to parse, but the expansiveness of this particular program makes that a little bit more challenging to parse. So I think, rather than sort of expand the whole service determination process for the sake of a single program, our recommendation would be sort of more the approach that Katie suggested, which is that customers who are interested in hearing more can simply call the person that they have been designated as their point of contact, and that may be actually a more efficient way of having the conversation anyway, as opposed to sort of more formal backs and forths. And at least in my program experience with EV programs at other utilities, that hopping on the there's no replacement for hopping on the phone and just actually having the conversation. And if that's what's needed here, maybe it could be a recommendation or a formalized, reiteration of an offer to have that conversation from the utility at the time that the service determination documents are sent over to the customer.
Bill, go ahead.
I tend to agree with what Elizabeth just said. Reading this, include a description of the analysis performed, provide detailed results, an explanation of the conclusion, and a clear pathway of project modifications need to be made. That sounds extremely onerous. Like for large interconnections of DERs, sometimes it can be a 50-page report that was the analysis that was done. So this doesn't, from the customer perspective, I don't think again, this is sort of just thinking practically, wanting to build charging stations. I don't think all of this is really helpful. And it's sort of like, show us your homework, which is, I don't think, I would imagine the utilities, that's why they have concern with this. But the thing that is frustrating as a customer is receiving a binary, right? Hey, we'd like to put this thing at that location, and you just get back a no. It's like, well, and again, you can have the phone call after that, but only receiving a no is very frustrating. And it's like, well, there's some power there, right? So how much is there? So I would say, the thing that in an ideal world as a customer, I'd like when we can't be served at a certain location is how much power is available in kilowatts. Hey, you asked for a megawatt. We don't have a megawatt. At this location, we have 200 kilowatts. Now, what it takes to determine that, I'm sure there's stuff that goes into it, and maybe it's very complicated, but at the end of the day, it's the utility system. They should know, they should be able to figure this out. They should be able to give us more than the binary response. And that's what I would be looking for if it is a negative on the service determination, a indication of what is available at that location.
Thanks, Bill. Alex, go ahead.
Hi, this is Alex with CalStart. Just want to echo that what we've heard from project developers, especially for large, medium, and heavy duty projects, is that it would be helpful to have more than, I mean, some of this is reflecting what Bill just said, but it would be helpful to have more than just a yes or no. You know, how much power is available now? How much could be available later on? What if they use a phased connection? We don't want to create a new burdensome process. I think that what we're most interested in here is just making sure that there's kind of a formalized checkpoint where this is discussed, and the customer can follow up as needed, or the utility can follow up as needed.
Thanks, Alex. Does anybody else have anything that they want to contribute to this? I thought I had seen another hand. Katie, go ahead.
Well, just kind of like in a, maybe like a different category or a different vein, I was going to suggest that, you know, maybe what we're driving towards here is one, like education to the customer that the idea of phased construction does exist. Like, you know, or maybe it's like an educational document of like, what happens if your site is determined as service inadequate, you know, where we're really kind of preparing customers for the fact that that is a possibility depending on what they're trying to build and where the site is located, and also encouraging them to do what we've heard a little bit in this conversation so far, which is to have a conversation to understand what the options are, and to get beyond, which again I think is best done in sort of a discursive, like back and forth environment, but to have that conversation where you're really evaluating from the customer's perspective what their options are besides just waiting for upgrades. So I think that's best done in a conversation with the utility, and I would just encourage us to try to make the modifications here such that they drive to that outcome.
Thanks, Katie. Rick, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to elaborate on Katie's comments. I think those were great comments, and some of the comments I heard from, you know, the customer's perspective. And you know, I just want to say that I don't think that so this issue is really not one that is, you know, specific to EV development. So and I think it's also important to understand, you know, how that process, you know, works within a utility. And, you know, so when a customer submits a request for load, you know, and there's a load study required, so that, you know, we study the system for that load. We don't study the system currently for well, you know, the 1.5, you know, megawatts you asked for isn't available, but, you know, 750 kW is available. You know, that's just not how load studies are designed, and how engineering, you know, processes work within the utilities. And so, you know, and we also have a queue that we're managing, right? So, you know, we're trying to respond to the customer, get them an answer on what they requested, and then if the customer, you know, wants to have further discussion around that, I think, you know, to Katie's point, we certainly are open and willing to doing that, you know. So I just wanted to make that point. You know, this is something that impacts not only EVs, but all customers looking to enter, you know, the company's interconnection process. Thanks.
Thanks, Rick. So what I'm hearing is for section 1.1.1, the language that's here right now might be a little bit too expansive, but there is some desire to have language there where a customer could get more information rather than just a black and white answer if they want more information.
That sounds right to me. And, you know, you could add something in there. It doesn't have to include the long list of what is in there now to include, but you could say if upon, you know, request or upon customer request, the utility could provide blah, 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 you know.
Okay, thank you, Mari. Okay, great. We're gonna keep moving forward.
Okay, so there's been a couple edits made to 1.1.2. So the heading, instead of reading establish a cancellation policy, it now states include a cancellation policy to underscore fairness and include the policy in the agreement. And then a new final sentence has been added to this clause, now stating each utilities program agreement should define what will trigger the cancellation of a project. So this is just, I think, adding more clarity to our cancellation policies discussion here, and just really making sure that the program agreements will identify what will trigger the cancellation of projects. And the JU made a couple edits in green, just fixing the language to their understanding. Do you have any thoughts or comments on this edit, or should we move forward? All right, not immediately seeing anything, we'll move to 1.1.3. So for use participant initiated temporary pauses to put projects on hold, there has now been part of a sentence added reading, rather than canceling a project where the participant is not ready to move forward, develop procedures that will allow for a project to be put on hold until the participant is ready to proceed, where previously it just read allow for a project to be put on hold. So this will indicate for the utilities to develop those procedures and make it clear to customers.
Does anybody have any thoughts or comments on that section? Seeing none, okay.
Let's see, and then in our final sentence in this section, it now reads, note that an on-hold status is temporary and the temporary status should be defined. So again, just adding a lot of clarity to define what these procedures are in the individual utility implementations of these practices. Any thoughts on this edit at all? All right, not immediately seeing anything, we'll move to 1.1.4. So this is the section covering robust and transparent records and project data platforms. It now reads, standardize and save the documentation of participants' correspondence and share changes in project status. Good record keeping supports program review and assists the program team with clear communication strategies via email, meetings, and/or the participant portal that supports the participant in determining what stage their project is in and whether a project is waiting on additional materials. Transparent record keeping also allows utility teams and participants to work from the same information in managing the project. And then it looks like we had an edit or a comment in here from Katie saying, recommend keeping the modifier participant provided because the point is to make sure participants know when the utility is waiting on participant action. For example, the utility wants to avoid situations where participants don't realize that a project is waiting on their own action. So is there any thoughts on whether we should keep the phrase participant provided, or any other thoughts on 1.1.4? Or Katie, if you want to speak more on that comment.
I think you captured it.
All right, perfect. Now we will now move on to 1.2. So the second sentence in 1.2, high volume application periods now reads, utilities should identify the threshold that triggers a high volume application period, including utility specific factors such as overall active application count, relative increases in applications month over month, and applications per staffing resource. So this change just effectively adds that the utility should be providing more detail in what triggers these high volume application periods. Any thoughts on this edit? All right, not immediately seeing anything. 1.2.1. So this is the section covering determining sequencing of incentive eligibility review. I don't believe there's any edits here. 1.2.2, no edits. Okay, so section 1.3. We've added in, you'll see this text in blue. We looked at one earlier, describing IREC's earlier comment about 1.1.1. These are what are going to describe the comments that we covered in last meeting's presentation. So regarding this section on innovations, IREC had provided the overarching comment to revise this area to provide clear steps for customers. An example of the reasoning was that it reads as an internal utility guideline document, and I think our earlier discussion in the meeting was to what extent this should be a participant-facing document versus utility practices document. So we've identified that staff's position is to hear more discussion as we've heard so far, and if there's any other we'd like to hear. Katie, do you want to speak on anything related to this, or Mari to your comments here?
I personally think we covered this. Sorry for jumping the gun on this topic. I just felt it kind of applied to the whole document. But I think we covered it in our earlier discussion about the fact that, you know, so far to date, this has really been looked at as sort of like a utility guideline document, but not to say that it couldn't result in important changes to either the JU website or to facilitate kind of one-stop shop service for customers, or to individual utility websites and other documents.
Perfect. Okay, that's helpful to hear. All right,
Does anybody else have any other thoughts or comments on that edit before we move forward?
Just echoing, I think we covered this earlier, so thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks, Mari.
All right, so let me identify our next edit. So, all right, so this was a item brought up by CalSTAR and EDF. So in section 1.3.2, establish a pace that matches participants' needs as much as possible within the safety parameters and in partnership with service determination teams. CalSTAR and EDF had identified this statement here, the second to last sentence, which reads, matching participants' pace can promote innovation for a positive participant experience. In contrast, mandated timelines shift focus away from the participant experience and towards a compliance mindset. The reasoning provided by CalSTAR and EDF was that with mandated timelines, utilities have an incentive to the average timelines by innovating, or I guess the incentive to increase the average timelines by innovating and accelerating specific projects when possible. Because consideration of interconnection timelines are outside the scope for this phase of EVIIWG, the language should not be included. And then the staff and JU, I think both agree with either removing or modifying this language. The JU had suggested replacing the toward a compliance mindset to read project throughput, so it would now read, in contrast, mandated timelines shift focus away from the participant experience and project throughput. For those who made the comment on the change, or Katie, to your proposed edit, are there any thoughts initially to this? Well, we see your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I would certainly recommend sticking with the original recommendation that EDF had made of just removing the second clause from that sentence entirely. I don't have a problem with saying that matching participants' pace can promote innovation for a positive participant experience. I certainly agree with that. I don't think we have seen any evidence in the record or in any of the discussions that we've had, I guess, in the EVIIWG that mandated timelines do shift focus away from the participant experience and project throughput. So I would just strongly urge us to take that language out.
Yeah, I think we're on board with that. We'll turn it over to Alex, this might just be a case of our misunderstanding what the highlight meant. So, but yeah, I'm removing that last clause, works for the JU.
Great. I was just going to second that. Thank you.
Jacob?
Yeah, I was just going to second that as well. And Jake Poten, VP of Corporate Affairs at Revel. Just to add that I think leaving flexibility in this process is kind of paramount to the process sort of being able to move forward. And we've seen this in other utility geographies as well, that basically if there are hard timelines, it restricts flexibility both from the customer side and the utility side. If there are customer side delays or there's delays on one project and not another, and we can shift resources there, whether that's because of our own internal design resources or external design resources or parts or components or things of that nature, or negotiations with the landlord, being able to sort of be flexible in the process, and the utility able to respond to sort of delays that we have on the customer side yields the best results in overall project delivery in our experience.
Thank you, Jacob. So I think we've all decided to strike that second clause. Does anybody else have any other comments about this section? Okay, we'll keep moving on.
Okay, so our next comment we've identified was from EVIIWG, stating that utilities should adopt and publicize the criteria of the auto rule or expedited/simplified review process, with the reasoning that it would benefit customers to make the criteria clear to help inform program design, and citing the SIR as having an expedited process for systems up to 300 kilowatts. Staff is open to hearing discussion on what additions stakeholders would like, and the JU has said that they recommend re-examining whether the SIR is the right example for this request, and that the SIR thresholds apply to exporting technology. Katie, do you want to speak on this or your comment here, or EVIIWG to your thoughts on this comment?
I can.
If it would be, sorry, go ahead. I was going to say if it would be helpful, let me hurry and leave this language here. This is at least what's currently in the document regarding the auto rule criteria.
Yeah, I think that is helpful to have up on the screen. Thanks so much, Zach. I think, you know, from our perspective, and we, you know, took this back to the energy services team just to make sure from a technical engineering standpoint we had the right lens here. But right, we just thought that the SAR might be the wrong analogy for what is happening with a simplified review, or as Con Ed calls it, an auto rule. Because with the SAR thresholds, those apply to the customer equipment and also to, they dictate what type of study the customer gets when the customer in fact pays for that study for any exporting technology being connected to the grid. In the case of connecting load, when a customer goes through an auto rule, they don't necessarily know that they're going through an auto rule. They just might notice that their ruling is returned a little bit more quickly. But the decision for that site to go through auto rule is dependent on a few factors. So there is a threshold, but the threshold changes based on a few factors, including in Con Edison service territory, whether the connection will happen within a networked system or within a non-network system, and also sometimes individual geographic locations. So kind of what borough or where in a borough that connection point is. So my fear is that this actually, although I understand the desire for transparency, I just don't know if it's actually that useful to customers, because it is quite variable based on where, even within Con Edison service territory, the connection is happening. And then to add another layer on top of that, if you're a developer that is working across New York State, you know, National Grid or Central Hudson may also have simplified review processes, but because they have different grids than the one in the Con Edison service territory, their simplified review process has an altogether different threshold. So I certainly appreciate kind of the origin of this edit. I just think the squeeze from the juice might not be what we were hoping for. Hopefully I explained that.
That makes sense to me. Thanks, Katie. Yeah, you all the staff did a great job with the reasoning, so I feel like I haven't had to really expand upon what we put in our comments, but yeah, that we were trying to figure out if there was something that would signal to the customers, you know, hey, you're looking at developing this size of project, but typically these, you know, this lower size could get you through this process pretty, you know, much more quickly, and it would still work for what you're trying to do. So allowing them to see that there's a streamlined process versus it being behind the curtain. But I think, Katie, what you're saying makes a lot of sense about the variation and the several factors. It's not just one, even within each utility jurisdiction. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks, Mari. It would be different if we were like, you know, connecting directly at the point of generation, but by the nature of it being a grid, you have to, when planning for connection, you have to take into account the full picture of all of the loads connected within that region.
Okay, so thank you, Katie, for expanding upon that. That was really helpful. Mari, I'm glad that it helped you as well. I just want to clarify at this point, do we think any edits need to be made to this section?
Not from my end.
Okay, all right, we'll keep moving. Thank you.
Okay, so let me hurry and find our next proposed edit. Okay, so on the subject of phased service connections, we had a lot of stakeholder feedback on this point, including CalSTAR, EDF, IREC, and VGIC. So I don't know if anybody has any strong feelings and would like to jump in first beyond what's included here. We heard kind of the proposed language to include in the document of, I don't know, either providing more education resources or noting how it's included as a standard option, or the, you know, the possibilities of what phased connection can do for customers. The JU said they are open to ideas around where to share a definition or case study of phased connection on the JU website. So I don't know if anyone has any strong feelings or would like to jump in first. Oh, we see your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to get the ball rolling here. Maybe two areas within this section that I would suggest some modifications. In the first sentence after the bolded section, if you could scroll up a bit further. Yeah, I guess it's right at the page break. So for example, when sufficiently resources, utility fleet advisory services could help participants understand the benefits of load management. That's another place where I would suggest making that a should. You know, I understand retaining the when sufficiently resourced language in there, but I think that should be part of the expectation. And then the broader recommendation I would make is at the end of this section. Right now, the language reads, participants could also work with Con Edison to understand the opportunity. Going on from there, you know, recognizing that the examples we have so far is Con Edison doing this for some customers. This language, as I read it right now, reads as just a recommendation just to Con Edison to do something that they're already doing. So I'm not sure it's accomplishing much right now. I would suggest reforming this language to make it another should, where the utilities should be working with customers submitting service applications to understand the opportunity to phase deployment of V1G chargers at a given site.
Those are both really good points, Cole. Jacob, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think something along those lines, I think is right. So, I mean, just to call back to our experience, whenever we've had, wanted to have these conversations with Con Ed, we've been able to. I think being able to have these conversations and sort of, look at if a phased approach makes sense for a site is definitely, a conversation that we'd like to have when it makes sense. But by and large, for every single site except for one, we really haven't pursued a phased construction approach. So I would just kind of stay away from a reality where engineering has to do work every single time to provide uh, a, a layout, a schematic, a sort of look into what a phased approach would be, just because it seems, engineering is already, I think, tasked with a lot in order to do the initial work that's needed to figure out, what feeders we can connect to and move the interconnection process forward as is. So I would just, I think I'm in agreement. I just don't think there's a mandate needed. It seems that the current process of sort of a customer going to Con Ed and asking to discuss this in consultation on a phased approach in a circumstance where it makes sense, I think is probably the right balance here.
Thank you, Jacob. There are a lot of hands up right now, and I don't know if anybody has anything to add to this or if we're just trying to respond. So Josh, your hand was up next, or Joshua, I'm sorry.
Josh Kaplan from National Grid. Mainly just adding that this is fairly similar, at least for National Grid, and that we have had some of these discussions with some V1G customers, particularly when they have sort of longer term plans, such as some of the school districts for their school bus fleets. It is tough. It doesn't always work out for goals for the customer that will work with what we have now and then a good phase for future to line up. But definitely agree with the previous comments that we're open to it, more than happy to have the discussions about it. Actually really like to have the discussions because the more information we can learn about the future plans of our customers, the better situation we are in to provide those services efficiently. But we want to avoid having to do onerous studies if it's just not going to be a thing. But definitely, if the customer is saying, yeah, this, a phased approach for our site could be really the right thing for us, then we're more than happy to start going back and studying and figuring out what it would look like.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
Yeah, similar feedback. I think just it probably doesn't make sense to us to offer this as a matter of course, but rather as an option for the customers who want that. And I would also just caution us that those customers who might want that are the ones who are here in the proceeding, and there are lots of customers who come through these programs who might not want or need a phased approach, or that might just not be what's best for them, and they're probably not as well represented here and not as sophisticated of customers as they come through the program. So I think if we bog down the process with overkill for some customers just to try to address the need that some other customers legitimately do have, I think that's probably not the right approach, and better to offer it as an option to the right customers than provide it to everyone standard.
That's really helpful feedback. Thank you, Elizabeth. Katie?
Yeah, I think just to build on what Josh and Elizabeth shared, and also to Jake's point about kind of the customer learning early on in the process about when phased might be a good connection, a good opportunity for them to make the connection here. I would say we could modify this to really direct customers to use the site assessment services to explore if phased deployment is going to be a possible solution. And then, as Josh was saying, from there, once the feasibility of matching the customer's goals to kind of the the structure of phase deployment is analyzed, then you get into actually moving the project into engineering study and into the more in-depth conversations. That's it.
And Rick?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to build on some of those comments. So, at the very beginning, it states, when sufficiently resourced, and this phrase here relates to language later in this document that we'll get to. So, in the short term, certainly utility fleet advisory services should help participants that require phase, connections to be able to, for us as the administrators of these EV programs, to help them walk through those requirements. But to some of the comments that Elizabeth was talking about, and so when we think about, like, should this be a standard practice, or should this be something that is available on a case-by-case basis for the right people that need that service. And so I just wanted to make that particular point. I think, if there are, when this document is submitted and final, and if there are, directives that come from the commission, later in this document, the utilities, discuss, if there are things that are going to require us to, require more resources, that we be able to ask for those resources. So we should be considering, what makes sense to Kate's and Elizabeth's comments. That's all.
Thanks, Rick.
I think there's another hand.
Cole, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So just to respond to that point, I mean, I completely agree that my intention here is not that the phased interconnection be the solution for every customer, right? It's that it be considered as a solution. And obviously, if a customer is not interested in phased interconnection and they would rather just wait around for the grid upgrade if they need it for full interconnection, then that's great. That's their choice, and they should go with that. So I think some reasonable constraints on the scope of who this applies to totally makes sense to me. The edits that I'm intending here are really just meant to be focused on making it a standard part of the consideration. So when a customer in this case is applying, it is one of the options that the utility is looking at to see if it's feasible before even doing that, full analysis. And then the other thing I was just going to say, so the header of this section refers to support participant strategies. And as I understand it, participant, as it's used throughout this document, has been used mainly to refer to participants in the Make Ready program. But then the first sentence refers to the utilities fleet advisory services programs, which there are many fleets, like private fleets, that may not be participating in the Make Ready program, or some fleets may be eligible for the medium and heavy duty Make Ready pilot program that are not technically in the Make Ready program, which, as I understand it, is light duty. So I don't know exactly what my recommendation is, but I think just some language to clarify which group of customers we're talking about here. And to Josh's point, like if National Grid or the other utilities are using this, for example, school bus fleets, just want to make sure we're not excluding them from the applicability of this language here by saying participant, when really that just means if you're in the light duty Make Ready program.
Thank you, Cole. Alex?
Yeah, Cole kind of put the words in my mouth. It essentially agree. Yeah, I mean, we're really interested here in making sure there's a dedicated touch point where all of this is discussed that's standardized. It's kind of similar to what we were talking about communication channels a minute ago. Yeah, if it's not the right choice, customer doesn't have to take it. We just want to make sure there's a clear touch point where it's discussed.
Great. This is all extremely helpful feedback. I really appreciate everybody speaking up. Does anybody else have any other comments on this point? I know Zach has been keeping comments. I've been taking notes. Okay, we'll keep going.
All right, so our next edit is covered in section 2. This is the section covering the participant informational tools for pre-engagement, planning, and project management. So there is now a few new sentences added that now read, it is noted that the joint utilities has not yet analyzed the costs of uniformly implementing the practices discussed in section 2. Should the commission determine that program process changes are needed, particularly those that require increase in staffing or information technology expenditure, the joint utilities request the opportunity to discuss the associated cost and how to recover these costs. So this edit is in response to this point from EDF regarding the highlighted sentence here. So currently the document without this addition reads, to uniformly adopt each of these best practices in full across the joint utilities to their full extent, additional administration budget would be required for most of the joint utilities. So in EDF's comment, they make the point that the need for additional funding is not self-evident, and given the goal of the proposal to streamline the queue management process, additional efficiencies may offset administrative costs, and that no evidence was shared with the EVIIWG to support the particular funding needs. So this at least was the JU's proposed response in addition to this. So Cole or Katie, if either of you would like to come off mute and either discuss the comment or the proposed edit here, that would be appropriate here.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. I think the additional language here gets at what we're getting at. One of my questions in the language in the highlighted section was where it says to uniformly adopt each of these best practices, whether by these best practices it was referring specifically to those in section 2 or the best practices throughout this document. And I think the sentence before makes it clear that that's referring to section 2. I would say that the point that we made that some of these efficiencies may offset costs that are incurred by creating these new tools. I think that's still true here. Maybe there is some language we can find that additional administrative budget may be required for the joint utilities, just because, as it says above, the joint utilities have not yet analyzed the costs of uniformly implementing. So I don't know that we have the evidence to say now that additional budget would be required.
Yeah, that's what we were trying to capture, Cole, that I think I mentioned at the top of the call, site assessments is a good example here, where Con Edison really has been able to offer site assessments to any customer, and that's because our administration budget is scaled to the incentive budget, and because of the number of customers we're serving. But you make the point that like we would have to analyze, does scaling up the site assessment services defray other costs such that additional funding is needed? We haven't done that yet, given that we're still in flight with the existing program and the existing budget.
Yeah, and I think some of the things in this section, like it is clear that they would increase costs. So what is, I think, 2.2 right now on expanding availability of the fleet assessment or fleet advisory services. I understand that's going to increase the cost. It's more fleets or more customers you're talking to. But then 2.3 is, building self-service tools that help prepare participants for productive conversations, thereby increasing the speed and transparency of the incentive application and interconnection process. Like if you're creating this tool that speeds the entire process, then that very well could offset the cost of doing so. So I would just say some qualifying language here to say we don't know right now that additional administrative budget would be required for all of these things is most appropriate.
And Cole, in your opinion, is this first sentence here sufficient in doing that, or would you propose additional language beyond this?
I would still recommend that in that last highlighted line, changing would to could. That would be my only other edit.
And I think part of the aim could be even removing the final sentence, but yeah, I think removing, or let's see, modifying, let's see, could.
Okay, Rick, I saw that your hand was up. Did you want to add anything?
No, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think we're there. So, nothing to add. Appreciate it.
Okay. Okay, we'll keep going.
All right, so our next edit here, or at least discussion, is related to a comment from EVIIWG. Let's see, this is what we discussed earlier in section 1.1.1. I think we've already mostly covered this idea of sharing the engineering review and determination results. Any show of hands if there's any further discussion on this, or should we continue? All right, not immediately seeing anything. Our next comment is related to one submitted by EDF discussing managed charging programs, just kind of focusing on providing more participant materials related to what's offered by the joint utilities currently. So the reasoning that was shared in EDF's comment was that the proposal frequently refers to V1G, but doesn't mention the managed charging programs or how the best practices are intended to coordinate with the managed charging programs, and saying it is less important that the fine details are provided about these, but that the relationship should be made clear from the start of the process. The JE responded saying that customers installing V1G EV chargers and applying for connection are eligible for operating cost relief programs like managed charging, whether they are participating in make-ready programs or not. The JU is working on cross-publicizing programs to make sure that customers pursuing EV charging infrastructure projects are aware of managed charging and other cost relief offerings. For example, during fleet assessment conversations, the customer learns about the benefits of complementary programs. I think from the staff perspective, language like these final two sentences could be helpful to include in the document, possibly to address EDF's point, but I think we'll turn it over to Cole if you want to speak on this, or Katie if you want to speak to your response here.
Yeah, I would just say, I think that's reasonable. The main thing we were trying to get at here is not that the make-ready or the managed charging programs need to be directly integrated into the application process here. Really more just a communication thing that is as part of that application process. And this kind of ties back into the phased interconnection side. As part of that application process, making sure that customers are aware early on in the process what their options are, including like what incentives and other programs are available, like the managed charging programs and the load modifying technology incentive program to deploy these technologies to control load. So I don't know if there's a specific section in here where it's most appropriate for that language, but I was really just looking for something in the communication section here, recognizing like the utilities are expected to be actively sharing that information with customers early on.
Yeah, it might be something that we put in the around site assessments, or in I'm not exactly sure where in the document it goes, but we as utilities are open to ideas and open to the suggestion that we want to be cross promoting our programs and letting customers know about complementary programs.
Katie, this is Rick. I agree. Cole, I really appreciate the feedback that you're offering, and just would offer that in several, we've had a lot of orders in multiple proceedings, in the last several months even, and we do have directives from the commission to cross promote these programs. So I think reference to it is, I think we agree, the JU agree that at least having reference to it here is certainly not harmful or, would be worthwhile. But we recognize we have a commitment to do this. So thanks.
Thanks, Rick. Yeah, not trying to create a new obligation with this portion of it, really. Just, I mean, to your point, there are a bunch of different programs and incentives and other obligations on the part of utilities in the EV space that the commission has created. So just making it, as clear as possible for customers what is out there, what they're eligible for, will definitely help with program uptake. And I think the JU has done a good job of that on the joint website right now. So this is really a just, make sure this continues and evolves as those programs evolve.
Okay, we'll take that back and try to see where we think that language could be put. Like Katie said, I think the site assessment spot could be one place, but I think it is, to your point, Cole, really important that customers or participants know that these other programs are available. So we want to make sure that's included. Okay, we'll keep going.
All right, so finding our next edit here, this relates to a comment from CalSTART discussing bridging solutions. So CalSTART's comment stated that bridging solutions provide actions to enable projects to get started on a heightened timeline, including solutions such as business as usual operations, such as shifting load to different feeders, flexible service connections, such as phased connection, or timed or scheduled connections, and suggest broadening the directive such that utilities communicate how bridging solutions would impact project timelines and cost. The JU's response is interested in learning about how bridging solutions can make an appointment with advisory services, or sorry, I think it got edited here somewhere, but I don't know if, Katie, you want to speak to your position on this, or I remember hearing someone from CalSTART was on the call, if you have knowledge of kind of what you would like to see here in the document beyond what's included now. I think we'd be interested to hear.
Yeah, Alex, do you want to go first and give?
Yeah, this is Alex with CalSTART. We are okay with fleshing out bridging strategies and more in the next phase of this working group or in the appropriate place. I think we were mostly here, where I guess what kind of feels the most within scope here is to ensure that there's a touch point for communicating it, which we've already gotten at.
Okay, that's helpful to hear. Rick, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks. One thing I would just add is, to our comments below, where we see this is similar to the phased interconnection, and depending. So I just want to. This may also have to do with just a general understanding of the interconnection process, and I think. Generally I'm not an engineer, I'm just familiar with the process. We're all EV SMEs here. So, we are always looking to offer the least cost solution and the least cost and easiest cost, quickest solution. And so some of this is, I don't want to say we're already doing it, but because that would be really not a completely true statement, but some of the examples of bridging that are given here are just part of a normal load study. We would if we could switch feeders or circuit, like we're going to do that first, and if that brings the load that required for the customer, then that may be all that's required. So, I think, when you start to get beyond that, it becomes a much more complicated process. And I think some of these things are already part of a normal, load study. And then, because it's not just whether we can provide the load, but like what we would need to do to provide that load. So I just wanted to offer that up.
Thank you, Rick. And yeah, I remember CalStar's comment discussed, using this forum, I guess, as that place to discuss where these are possible. So I think the comments in the appendix will include, the summaries will include CalStar's suggestion of, using or designing a forum for this to take place, and understanding it's not, just super easy, hurry and write it down right now. It would need involvement from all the stakeholders on the call, and I think we'll take that back and utilize that process from there. Any other comments on this area?
Yeah, I would just add that I think our interest was mostly in some of the more advanced solutions, including the flexible service connections, but also, mobile transformers or battery storage or things like that. But we do understand that it may take time to flesh out that discussion, and we're not trying to crunch it in here. So yeah, happy to find the right place for that conversation.
Yep. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, I'd like to second Alex's point. I think it would be great if we could find a place to flush this out, and obviously not right now during this working group, but yeah, like all those suggestions.
All right, not immediately seeing any other hands, we'll move on to our next edits. All right, so 4.1 looks to be our next edits here. This is the subsection describing that utilities should define if, when, and how to accept project scope changes that impact service determination. The first edit that's been made is a addition to the opening sentence, now reading, because these changes such as adding higher or lower capacity EV chargers, changing the number of chargers, or moving the service point of entry require new engineering analysis, utilities should have a plan for such changes and provide an estimated updated timeline that each modification will require. So again, just trying to provide more clarity and just more definition of what's required in this area. And then looking at IREC's comment on this section, IREC had suggested to revise to provide more clarity on the customer's ability to request project modifications and how it impacts the process, stating that the section describes actions to take in the future rather than reaching a standardized approach now, provides no clarity to customers, and though Con Edison defines its policies in a footnote, it could be moved to the body of the document. That the proposal should have a common set of procedures. So again, I think getting towards the point of having that more standardized process here. The utility's response was that every project modification where load is increased would require a new service determination and engineering review. The utility will communicate the impact of a new service determination on timeline when the customer requests a project modification that increases load. And then there was a comment up here left by Katie that says, let's discuss with stakeholders if there is confusion in this area on what this practice is about. The JU is trying to say that each utility follows one of two policies when a customer requests a scope change, and the policy is communicated either by the customer having the ability to complete a new service determination while their incentive application remains valid, or by submitting a new incentive application and go through another service determination. So if anyone has any immediate reactions, or Katie, if you want to expand, we can hear that.
Yeah, I can expand and just, offer that if there are any clarity edits to this section may not have been written clearly from the get-go. So this is a good opportunity to make some modifications if we can. I don't think there's any problem with the additional new language there in blue, but I did just want to make sure that stakeholders understood that we always require a new study and a new service determination if this change in a project scope increases the load requested. And so, maybe that needs to be stated more explicitly. And what this practice was really about is saying that the utility should determine kind of from the get-go if they're going to require the projects that have those changes to start the process all over again with like a totally new incentive application, or if it's a matter of just saying, okay, we're going to pause while you get the documents you need, the new documents you need for the new request, now that you are requesting more load. So I think, just to reiterate, the point of this practice was to say a utility should determine which of those two tacks they're taking, essentially kind of how strict are they going to be with in-scope modification requests. And regardless of which tact they take, a new service determination is always required if an additional amount of load or an increase in load is being requested. So just wanted to put that out there and make sure it was clear.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. And
Go ahead,
yeah, I just saying, I think that's helpful clarification. And yeah, I think the main purpose behind this comment was just, again, adding clarity to this process. So I think, I think the line that was added there does help. I think we weren't assuming that, in that first sentence you have such as adding higher or lower capacity EV chargers. Yeah, we weren't assuming that it would always be an increase, that sometimes it would be a decrease. If you're trying to, remain under a certain threshold so that you don't trigger grid upgrades, if that's clear when you talk to the utility. So I think it was just having a clear process. So I think the more that, we can help customers understand what that is to be able to change their project or project design, I think that'll be important.
Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Josh Kaplan from National Grid. I think the hard part with preparing like a fully transparent policy for everyone is it very much depends on the change. There are some cases where increasing the load won't really impact the application very much. Maybe that we'll study it, but then we'll be like, okay, we can continue going forward. And potentially the utility side costs of the project might be exactly the same depending on what was happening. There are cases where doing the same load but moving location or changing a facet about your project would actually change things about our application that need to be adjusted. But really, like, the best thing is to contact the program manager that the customer has been linked with, to basically learn what will happen for any potential changes they're considering, because there can be a multitude of reasons why things could change with either the service request application or the make ready application, and it also could be time variant. We may be more lenient about changes earlier in the program, but as some of us have started to approach the limit of the number of plugs we can incentivize, we have to be stricter about potential changes because we don't necessarily have the plugs in the budget to accept changes at a certain point. So it's very much time dependent, but the one surefire way for a customer to know is to contact the program manager that's been working with them from the point they submitted their initial application or even before that.
Got it. Thanks, Josh. That's helpful.
Thank you all for weighing in on that. I think, I understand Josh's point, but to Mari's point, I think the language that could be added is just more information about how the process could work, or at what point should the developers go back and talk to their contact to get more information about what the next steps would look like. So I just want to do a quick time check here. We've got about 14 minutes left. We don't actually have a ton left in the body of the document, but there were a couple things in the appendix. Are folks okay if we just continue on and see where we land, or some other strategy for moving forward? I see Cole gave me a thumbs up, so we'll just keep going on and see where we get to. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephanie. All right, so our next edit revolves with mainly removing section 4.2 from the document. So this originates from comments from CalSTAR and EDF to remove the EAM references from the proposal, or a couple of redline suggestions. So the reasoning given was that the utilities already have an incentive to connect new loads, and a balanced EAM, should I guess provide more upsides, downsides. So from conversations with the staff and the JU, I think both of us are in favor and supportive of removing the references to EAMs from the proposal. Is everyone in agreement with this, or have any thoughts on removing 4.2 from the document?
Okay, we're not hearing anything, so we'll move ahead with redlining that section.
Okay, and then we have, let's see, just in the conclusion of the document, it now reads, this modified proposal includes a wide range of best practices compiled by the joint utilities and discussed in the EVIIWG. Effective application queue management stems from implementing best practices, utility incentives, and transparency across stakeholders, with the note that this clause right here will probably be modified given the removal of section 4.2 from the document. And I think that brings us at least to the end of the body of the document. Are there any final thoughts or comments on what we've reviewed so far, or anything we've missed in the body? All right, so let's hurry and move to just a note with Appendix C. So as of right now, Appendix C is a summary of all the comments that have been submitted on the straw proposal. This includes the comments that have been received going back to last April and May that are on the EVIIWG website, as well as those recently submitted to DMM in January. So this section here will be updated to include all those comments as we've discussed, so the commission will be able to review the full scope of what stakeholders in the EVIIWG have discussed, and those issues that were maybe outside the scope of what EVIIWG has the authority to discuss. So this is the part of the document that will be updated to incorporate this. I note we had there was a couple mentions of a dispute resolution process, such as in New York City's comment. And I remember another commenter, it might have been VGIC or EVIIWG, had covered a dispute resolution process. As of right now, Con Edison linked to the dispute resolution process it utilizes in its service territory. Are there any thoughts from those who submitted comments, or just at least what's missing in a dispute resolution process that might be worth including in the document at this point? Melanie, I see your hand is up.
Hi, yes, I'm here for New York City, and I think we saw that that addition had been made, and we were fine with including that in response to our comment.
Melanie, would you like to see that information up in the body of the document rather than down here?
Yes, that's a good point. I thought I had seen it up there, but maybe it wasn't. But yeah, I think if we add that to the body, it would address what we were trying to go for with our comment on dispute resolution.
Okay, great. Mari?
Yeah, we had also had that, had been pushing for some kind of dispute resolution, but I think if utilities do have processes and they're able to include them in the body, that would be helpful.
Does anybody else have any thoughts about the dispute resolution process? Okay, we'll keep going.
All right, so this brings us to, I think, our final notes here. So to jump in real quick, so these are the items we've discussed as possibilities for a phase 2 depending on what the commission rules, or possibly other proceedings or areas, again, depending on the commission's view of these topics. So these include those that were included on the slide at the beginning of the presentation as what's outside the scope of EVIIWG's authority. I think we had IREC's comment of revising the proposal to incorporate standardized procedures that will provide more clarity and guidance. This one's down here because I think it's kind of included in much of the scope of what we discussed so far, but was an overarching point. So if there's anything we've missed in these points, we'd be happy to hear those now, or any kind of final conclusions now that we've made it through the end of the document.
I think we've covered this, and I do appreciate the changes that have been made to add a little bit stronger language around what utilities will be doing.
And we just want to note too that, you know, just because these suggestions are down here in the appendix doesn't mean that we don't think that they're important. We absolutely do. We're just trying to work within the scope of what the commission authorized the EVIIWG to do at this point in time. Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Josh Kaplan from National Grid. I think one point that we did discuss a little bit earlier, but at least for National Grid and the other utilities can add if they see fit. But many of these topics of the sort of suggested phase 2, we definitely recognize as excellent topics for discussion with stakeholders and DPS and other parties interested. To help, you know, continually improve the service connection process for our customers and stakeholders. One of the pieces, though, that we do think is that it would probably be best done in a process that is not labeled EV Interconnection Working Group, as we generally treat EV service connections similar to how we would treat any other service connection of a similar size and scope. And so we would really appreciate getting feedback from other stakeholders that aren't necessarily just focused on EVs. And we wouldn't want to potentially put in policies where, for example, we set average and maximum energization timelines for EV connections, but not for all connections. We would want it to be consistent across all connection types, especially because we also do at times see connection requests that are a mix, such as someone putting up a new building and including EV charging in this new building. So that all being said, we would sort of recommend these discussion topics be held more broadly than the EV context, and we're afraid that by calling it EVIIWG phase 2, we may discourage some other stakeholders who might just think, oh, this is an EV discussion. I don't care about EVs. I don't need to worry about this. But they may care about general building development or other topics. So we'd like it to be, I'd say, a broader discussion.
That's really helpful, and we agree with you there. Rick, go ahead.
I'm going to go ahead and just take my hand down. That took care of it.
Okay, and Cole?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, Josh, I don't think I disagree with any of that. Certainly, you know, the phased interconnection solutions we were talking about and the broader flexible interconnection solutions here are certainly not just something that should apply towards EV customers, and a lot of the other things at issue, both, you know, for queue management for applications and then these broader issues in the list here. I agree. Like these are emerging issues for all types of load. I know one of the proposals, I can't remember if this was in the order on the midpoint review or just in the document, the governance document for the EVIIWG, suggested that a phase 2 or next step after the adoption of a proposal here would be continuing this work as a subgroup within the interconnection technical working group, which continuing the work within the ITWG generally, I think, may make sense. My one concern with that is, as I understand it, I haven't been closely involved in the ITWG, but I believe that is really focused on generation interconnection, distributed generation interconnection. And so just wouldn't want these topics to kind of get buried within a group that is not focused on load interconnection. So if that is something, you know, that's just as simple as changing the scope of the ITWG and splitting it into kind of the load and generation tracks, or a separate parallel working group that is focused on load interconnection and not specific to EVs, I think either of those could be a good solution here to continue this work and yeah, make it broader to all electrifying load.
Yeah, I'd agree with that sentiment. Finding the right place, making sure it's scoped right to get the attention it deserves is really the right thing to do.
And I just wanted to, oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Katie. Rick had his hand up, so I just want to make sure
Oh, yeah, go for
I'm
it.
not leaving anybody out.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to comment on Cole's thoughts there. I think those are very helpful comments and agree 100%. And so, you know, I don't think any of us really know at this point, you know, what the appropriate home for these are. And you know, valid points, Cole, about, you know, ITWG. And I think we just want to, you know, wherever it lives, or what it, you know, it might perhaps be an entirely new working group. You know, I think we'll have to figure that out, but we just don't want to limit the scope to, you know, and just stick the EV moniker on there and you know, to Josh's comments earlier. So thanks, appreciate it.
Katie, go ahead.
At the risk of being slightly redundant, just wanted to highlight that there could be multiple places where these topics could live, you know, so the topic in the second to last bullet here around application harmonization, like that could be appropriate for the ITWG because it's talking about export, but then you know, there are other places where some of these topics could land, in addition to the possibility of something entirely new. So just wanted to say that not everything has to land in the same place.
Thanks, Katie. I just first want to thank everybody so much for their feedback and discussion today. I think this for staff was extremely helpful. We really appreciate your time with this. We're internally discussing what the next steps could potentially be. You know, we definitely want to incorporate some of the comments that have been brought up here today. And so we're open to, you know, resubmitting this with additional modifications and then having another EVIIWG meeting. We have either the 12th or the 19th available from staff's perspective. I don't know if anybody thinks one day is better than the other, or thinks we should just proceed with going through this SAPA process after that next round of changes is made. Any feedback would be really helpful. Mari?
Yeah, it seems worth it to me to have one more, especially since we didn't get to talk through as much of the phase 2 and where those are going to live. And I don't know if that's just going to be, you know, the commission's call, or you're going to make a recommendation for the commission, but it could be worth having one more discussion on that. Because I think that's a really important piece to a lot of us. And I think one thing that I didn't see is, and it may be listed here, is IREC is really interested in seeing the tracking and reporting of end-to-end timelines. So there's been a lot of discussion about mandated or setting those average and maximum timelines, but we're interested in understanding what the current timelines are across the JU. And that's something that, you know, so separate from the pace of energization tracking, which is on there. That was another thing I would add.
Okay, that's helpful. Richard?
Yeah, I'd agree with Mari's point. And also there is a discussion of how interconnection queues can be viewed, if it should be public information like the DG side, how there's publicly accessible data there. Just some members setting up bidirectional projects. There's been some issue with the queue there, but yeah, this looks great. And I also think a second discussion would be good.
Okay, thank you. Cole, I can't tell if that's a hand or not.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, no preference between the 12th or the 19th for a follow-up call. Just if you do end up scheduling another meeting once you have a chance to make edits here, it would just be extremely helpful to maybe see that updated document ahead of the meeting so we could come in with any questions we had based on the last edits that were made.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're going to try to target the 19th. We will get another secretary notice out with all of the details and, you know, a tentative agenda to the extent that any other topics that didn't, you know, get brought up in these last couple minutes we want addressed, you know, please feel free to email me or Lisa Rossi or Zach Archibald, and we can try to incorporate those. And then, Cole, to your point, we'll get that revised document up as soon as we can.
Great, thanks so much.
I just included the EV team email in the chat. So yeah, if there's any topics we missed or, you know, anything you would like to communicate in the meantime, evse@dps.ny.gov will reach us. And thanks again, everyone, for your feedback today. Super helpful.